Okay, so good afternoon. I am Atto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out the future of smarter buildings. It's great to have you with us today. In case you're wondering who we are, our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org. And just to make this sort of important point always every week is that the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's make the this conversation this week especially interactive on chat and Zoom, on on the Zoom chat. Sorry, questions and other points. Sorry. All right, and this deck is available on Monday Live in case you want anything from it. This is being the last week in January, the last Monday in January. We're going to be continuing on the whole "Who moved the cheese? Who moved my cheese?" Theme. And today we're going to be sort of doing a normal news and chit chat, and then we want to sort of aim towards the sort of the interoperable cheese platter. We talked about having multiple cheeses earlier in this month, so I thought we can talk around that concept later on. But before we do that, let us get a sort of update from Ken Sinclair from automatedbuildings.com. Over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Anto. I guess you guys have probably noticed that AHR Orlando is approaching rapidly, and we're scurrying around trying to get everything together. I think we're in pretty good shape. We've got some 14, 15 sessions, which is a record for us. So got a lot of folks involved and a lot of content covered. Right there in the middle of the screen is Moving the Cheese, How to Adapt to Change, which is a summary of last Monday. Came out pretty well. It's showing that the AI is going to have a big effect in melting and moving cheese. So that's good. If you want to know more about that, the Smarter Summit is going to be a logical place to learn about that. And their catchphrase is Linux is coming to buildings. So that's an interesting concept as well. The other tag on the screen I've got was a book that was published called Responsible AI. And I think this kind of hits us on the nose as we're all starting to accept, adapt, and use AI. We have to understand that it's an incredibly powerful tool, and with it comes responsibilities. It's like a power saw. We got to be careful we don't cut our hands off or the hands of all the people around us. So I think just that whole psyche of what is responsible AI is something that we need to deal with. And as I mentioned with the Smarter Summit, when the Smarter Summit ends, of course, they said there's a football game to happen, so we'll have to see how that all works out. But in addition to that, if you survive that, the next day, Lawn International on their booth out on the floor has gathered together a whole bunch of folks that were willing to keep that conversation going. And what's inside of all of that is how AI is going to affect labor. The fact that we have a labor shortage, so in a lot of ways it's a solution. We've got an interesting article on our site, Labor Shortages in the Building, and what it's talking about is just our time to train has rapidly changed, where we kind of used to use the osmosis method. You just hung out with a bunch of people that talked funny, and eventually you started talking funny and you're in. We don't have time to do that now, so we need to come up with different methods of how to educate people. And we've got a good session going on in Orlando on that with Phil Zito, so that's good. The other one we've got is another one of our contributing editors has started this business school of AI. and it's more of an online approach to it. I think that's abuse. I think it's something that we all need to do, is to learn more and more about AI. And down in the bottom corner, I've got we've got a session going on Wednesday, which is interesting because we never had sessions on Wednesday before, and we've kind of turned the training sessions into we have 3 or 4 of them going on Wednesday, and one of ours is the impact of AI and BAS 101. A lot of people are using it for a lot of things that I'd never imagined, and this is just kind of going to be a workshop of that uh, with Brad, who's a consultant in the industry, and uh, the guy from Cochrane, who basically is a practitioner using a lot of this stuff. And that kind of leads me to my last article that I kind of wedged in here because I just wrote it last night or the night before. AI-powered edge devices, transformative technology that will revolutionize. I just got a new phone and I'm enamored by it and amazed at what AI can do in an end device. And just discovering that, it just started my mind reeling that we as an industry are very edgy. A lot of our products, a lot of what we do is on the edge, and our control systems become parts of air conditioners, chillers, VAV boxes, rooftops. And so we need to do a better job of our edge devices. Our new edge devices have to be reinvented, and they have to, some of the requirements are is they're probably going to be running Linux. Secondly, is that they're going to understand and pull down cloud native information. They're going to be built in a Lego type approach that will take pieces of cloud native coding and put into a actual edge device. And the big advantage of having all of that in the edge device is these platforms have become probably cheaper than the platforms we're traditionally using, and they have way better connections, and they give you the option of either being connected with wire or just being out there as a standalone device. And once we understand the power that the cell phone people have given to cameras, thought, the ability to reach out to their own databases that are reachable by the device, it just gets the mind reeling to how powerful our edge devices could be. And I think it could redefine our industry. It gives us a good thing to hang our hat on. And I think people will start buying our control systems again because they are so much more powerful than the old systems. And they fit with almost everything we've been doing at Monday Live and C4 SB. So hooray. And back to you, Anto.
Right, yeah, because you were talking essentially about AI applications on the edge that needs a home, and we've got a home. We've been building this thing called the IBB exactly for those kinds of things. So there are open doors waiting for them.
Yeah, I think I see it beyond that too, is I see that even our lowliest controllers can probably now support AI, and the ability for one controller to call out for a device or to call out for a pump to start and stop in an AI manner is there. So I think there's a whole rebuild, and yes, IBB will orchestrate, but what it's orchestrating is destined to get smarter quickly.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Ken. Rick, what's going on in Orlando in a couple of weeks?
So Ken just hit on a few of the things: the Smarter Summit, the Super Bowl watch party, the sessions, But I wanted to just give a little bit of more or a preview, I guess, of what we're going to try and do at the summit. We've been having more and more
Shall I bring up
conversations.
the rough agenda?
Oh, sure.
Is that
So I'm going to try not to read this or get distracted by trying to read it. But a real key part of what we're going to be doing is trying to introduce and answer some questions about how the Linux Foundation involved in this industry is going to be giving an opportunity for companies and individuals and customers to see this, more details of what Ken is describing as the, AI at the edge or the cloud native adoption, or, just some more tangible details of how to put some of these things into play. And there is, a lot more. There's more technology details available to, inject into the existing work that's happening in the industry, and that's what C4SB is going to be trying to do. And at the summit, we're going to announce some of the specific things. We're going to demonstrate some of it. But please come to the summit. And one of the things that'll happen is that you'll get to be introduced to Jory Burson, who will be there as she's vice president of standards for the Linux Foundation. She reports to Jim Zemlin, and Tracy and Pete and I just got off of a call with her, and she was describing how, her interpretation of how some of the herding of cats that we're trying to do in this industry can be accomplished sort of more effectively, and how the Linux Foundation can give some framework to and confidence to the different efforts that are already underway. So, come to the summit, hear Jory speak a little bit, see some of the examples of what's been the progress of the IBB and digital twinning and connection profiles. Hear from a couple of examples of where there's some customer work that is articulating the demand side of this equation of newer architectures and newer technologies, and then follow us to the watch party, where I'm still trying to figure out who are the teams that are playing in the Super Bowl this year. It's one anyway. We're going to have a watch party at the Rosen Center, and the Rosen Center is attached to the Convention Center. And there's a few folks from Kansas City that'll be there. But if there's Philly fans, I guess we'll have to welcome them as well. But and then
should be fun.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, and smartersummit.org, I've put it on chat. So please head over there and register yourself. And the link board is normal. Any other thoughts before we jump into cheesy stuff?
So where's the Super Bowl being played this year?
Well, the other thing is, if no one really knows, it must not be important teams that are playing.
New Orleans.
New Orleans. So
Yeah.
unless they're planning on, importing all of the refs that work for Kansas City, you don't have a home field advantage, Rick.
We do, because as we discussed on a previous call, it's Taylor Swift fans that are paying off the refs. It's not Kansas City fans.
Oh, I see. Well,
Yeah.
obviously that's working well,
Yep.
as evidenced by the last at least two playoff games.
Just have one more game to go, and then they can
Yep.
go back to their regular jobs.
Right.
All right, obviously there's no other thoughts and news.
Sure.
All right. Who moved my cheese? Again, just a reminder, this is all based on this book that came out in 1998, I think it was, asking some very fundamental questions about change. We spent the first week this month talking about these four characters and just the whole notion of cheese moving, which was a really good conversation. Then we spent the next week in January talking about control. Who controls the cheese? Do you control the cheese, or does the cheese control you? Kind of thought process. Which is also interesting. And last week we talked about how the cheese gets moved, and I think the big lesson there is that there's some interesting angles with respect to thinking of buildings as assets, because the way you manage asset, the policy that you put into place to manage the asset will have an impact on whatever happens in the asset, which is basically a lot of the cheese that our industry goes after. So this week, getting into the interoperable cheese platter. I have no idea where this conversation is going to go this week, so I'm just going to open it up to the panel. We talked about bringing everything together. There's no one cheese that fits everyone, and so this is kind of the notion of bringing everything together to create a holistic solution that has all of the different elements, which is our cheese. So, Tracy, you look like you want to jump in there.
No, not necessarily.
But you did. You already did.
Yes. I just to kick it off. I mean, we're kind of looking at this month in its entirety, and the thing that comes to mind is just a reaffirmation that somebody has definitely moved our cheese in this industry. There's no denying that the world is kind of going in one direction, and if we don't get on board with that, we will be left behind. And I don't just mean we as an industry, but we as individuals and companies within this industry. And I think that's the important takeaway from this month's discussion leading into the summit is, we're on board with that, and we are trying to create an opportunity for everybody to learn and understand that a little bit further, to help, sort of unify our industry in directional nature, if nothing more, so that we can get to a world that, many of us have been envisioning for a very long time in terms of open, interoperable, controls and building automation systems and so forth. So this is just a great opportunity to do that. And I think the really interesting part of this is, now you'll start to hear this from others outside of our industry, in how this same movement has happened in other vertical industries and markets, and the benefits that were derived from that evolution into, this sort of open source cloud native computing architecture, if you will.
So maybe Rick, you can speak to that, because that's a critical message from the Linux Foundation about how they have impacted other industries, and the open source and open sort of philosophy has sort of driven a lot of people, a lot of companies in many different industries to gain from that view.
Yeah, it's been turning out that the concept of open source and open standards has probably been a little bit better understood. It's like by complying with, how standards can work, and industry take shape and can move forward with, owners, everybody, all stakeholders having confidence that things are going to work the way they expect. So open standards is probably better understood than what open source is. But as it turns out, the lessons from other industries, and we've already got quite a bit of open source adoption in our industry, but open source has just really remarkable benefits for everybody, and owners really, really, really want it, which or they want to know that they can have interoperability, even if they're happy to buy everything from one vendor. They want to know that they can have some level of swappable capability. But these examples of how open source and participating in open source has really accelerated different industries and redefined certain industries, is worth a read. And that's it's just starting to be understood, as Tracy was describing. And then, so this is different than what was happening 15 years ago or 10 years ago. The capabilities of what open source software can do now are really quite recent, since not, Linux is 30 years old, Kubernetes is 10 years old, containers and Dapper and Helm and all those sort of things are really, really just now being understood as to how they can change how software architectures can be used to move an industry forward faster. So, don't feel bad about not understanding some of this stuff. It's all really pretty recent. And that works kind of two ways. One is, it's not too late. You're not too far behind. But the other is, whatever you invented and whatever code you wrote 5 years ago it's not modern anymore. Good news, there's ways to modernize it pretty quickly. And so that's the way that open source and the way that new sort of software development is working to change how outcomes happen and how digitization happens is really new. And the time is now to understand how it impacts your company, your code, and your career. Ooh, I like that. Company, code, career.
So Kimon just brought up this news that came out this morning of the Chinese AI, the DeepSeek, I think it's called, which is open source, and it significantly undermines pretty much all of the other AIs that we've been using. Undermine, sorry. What did I say?
No, you said that. I'm trying to understand what that means exactly.
Well, it's replacing the sort of the leadership that OpenAI and Gemini and others have.
The article, Tracy, indicated that the implementation is estimated to be a lot less costly.
Yes, significantly.
Significantly less costly. Yep.
Again, that's open source, but it comes from China, so there's obviously other angles there.
Let me pick up on what Rick was just saying and maybe add my flavor to it, which is that I had the opportunity, as many of you know, to join Tritium in its early days and to see the impact that one company was able to make on an industry to help facilitate the problem of crossing silos through normalization of data from different protocols. Okay, so it was a protocol problem. It was all perceived as a protocol problem in terms of achieving interoperability. And of course, during that time, other technologies came along, whether it was the internet, browsers, better processors, Wi-Fi, and those individual technologies could be individually incorporated by any one of the suppliers into their products in a pretty straightforward fashion. So you didn't need industry leadership of one company or a group of companies to do that necessarily. It could just happen organically, at least from the way I look at it. So what has fundamentally changed in these last few years is that we're shifting, we've raised the challenge of interoperability from that of being normalizing protocols to getting applications to interoperate, much like we're able to do on our phones or on our laptops or any normal computing devices where we want the apps to interoperate. And this is where Linux, the Linux Foundation, as we've been talking about them all this month, plays a really significant role in helping any of us as companies, and obviously the companies that aren't represented on today's phone call, to get on board. But the fundamental thing is it's about application interoperability. That's the problem that we were trying to solve. And by moving to open source and creating an architecture that is being described in the IBB as an example, but what it's really doing is it's cloud native computing, right? We're doing our job, which is to lead, which is to show how we can all get there. And the nice thing is we're not going to be dependent on any one of us to try to solve this problem and then get everybody else to go along with it. It's not necessary. Okay, so it's being done through open source, and the value of the open source is being proven not in our industry, but in all these other industries. And so bringing that awareness to our industry should largely be the debate, if you will, to get our companies to get on board. And so that's really what I see as about how we solve this problem, is to do what we're doing and do our best job of communicating the value proposition to our industry as a whole over the next few months. And the more people, the more of our fellow competitors, if you will, suppliers that we can get to attend the Smarter Summit, the better off, because, you know, with the VP from Linux Foundation being there to present, they're not having to hear from us per se. They can hear from the person who's really high up in that organization and can tell the story. So I think in the remaining time we have, I think we should do our best to try to reach out to, you know, the big four, the big five, however you want to describe them, and encourage them to participate.
I don't think you're going to get any arguments on that from anyone here. Absolutely, but also not just the big companies. Obviously, a lot of the companies have an opportunity here to differentiate themselves and help drive this.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it's a dream in a way, right?
Right.
Yep.
And Ken, I think you're seeing this. I think you keep on saying that many of the sponsors that have signed up recently on automated buildings are kind of new type aggressive. So that's definitely pushing this agenda forward.
Yes, and they're also heavily vested in platforms that I would deem as cloud native, and they basically are coming at it from a server side. They're also seeing it as a top on the industry. They're basically straddling the industry, not so necessarily. They're not bringing new controllers with them. Nobody wants to get into that messy business. Everybody wants to stay on top of it. So, and I think there's going to be a lot more. The next wave I would predict that we haven't started yet is the people that have taken that technology and then twinned it with AI, and will be actually.
And it's frozen. Jim, you want to take up the conversation?
To me, I think that the open source, the Linux Foundation, all extremely powerful and creating a great opportunity for us, which is really an overlay on what's already going on with the industry. I think we need to really divide the industry into two value propositions. New construction of buildings and retrofits, of which, let's say there are 5.5 million commercial buildings in the US. So let's say that 1% of those are being newly constructed every year, and about 10% of those are being retrofit. So if we look at the population of buildings with controls, it's about 1 million buildings. The market, as it's previously been defined, has been all about how controls companies and contractors bid new jobs and retrofits. The value proposition that's been coming up over time for things like analytics or cybersecurity, those are about the operations of buildings. And we're just witnessed really the last 10 years where the major players in the industry saw the value in analytics and tried to make the leap, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in each company to create their own analytics platform in what Rick likes to call the walled garden. Almost all those attempts have ended in failure at this point after 10 years of investment because they haven't been able to really sell that technology. And the reason is that those companies were designed to chase construction business, retrofits, and new construction. And these platforms basically were their attempt to try to cross the chasm and get operating revenue out of the existing building stock, for which they basically had very large service businesses before, but businesses that they got basically by default rather than having to sell and earn, which is basically maintaining their equipment, providing software upgrades. So you now, what you've had is over the past 20 years, the incumbent large companies in the industry have been cannibalizing their channels, their company-owned channels. And those channels were the way that they could have monetized that application value. Well, that game's pretty much over now. They've cannibalized those channels. They've come out with the application platforms that they haven't been able to monetize. So the question is where does it go from here? And I think this is where the Linux Foundation, this other stuff gets really interesting. Because as the majors have been unable to cross the chasm from the construction side to the operating side, I believe that the independents, and some of these might be very large independents or roll-up of independents, will have access to monetize that ongoing operating part of the building. And that's where the technology from Linux Foundation, the applications, the interoperable applications that we're all working on, that's where they'll shine. I'm sorry I was so long-winded, Anto.
That was a great response. Sorry that Ken didn't hear it, but he can watch the recording. So, David, you tend to have a focus that's slightly different to the rest of the group. Do you want to chime in your perspective?
I really appreciated Jim's words. Jim, that was spot on. And I really think that the industry is at an inflection point. And to loop this back to DeepSeek that we were just talking about, I'm just reading some notes here. Its model is called R1, and it outperforms ChatGPT. It took 60 days to build and only cost $6 million. Of course, you know, we have to adjust currency values here, but it's less than 10% of the US spend, and it costs less than 98% less to operate. Obviously, that has to be adjusted for, you know, the countries that they're operating in. But what's interesting is that it topped the Apple Store charts, and they publish their code online for free. And what to me is most interesting about this cheese coming onto the charcuterie table is that it is the epitome of disruption. And it caused a tech sell-off today in the other platforms that are US based and, you know, traded on the stock exchanges. And so this is the epitome of a disruptive technology. And this is, you know, the nature of what capitalism is all about. And the reason that I'm setting that as kind of the preamble is that when we look at the value of interoperability and everything we're talking about, the industry has historically focused on the energy savings and tenant comfort, maybe. But really, what we need to look at, in my opinion, is the labor cost savings, especially in the light of the labor shortage and highly skilled labor shortage we have. It's really around how are we going to meet the existing demand, let alone do it profitably. And this is where I think the true opportunity lies, in us better understanding and explaining the value story around staffing and the cost of it, and how to do it in a portfolio wide or campus wide or fund wide manner.
So I wonder what's causing the disruption, so to speak. I mean, it performs a little better, it's a little less expensive to operate, but I'm wondering if the disrupting factor that's really the concern is the fact that it is open source and leaves it.
The fact that it's 98% cheaper to operate, you don't think that has an impact?
Yeah, I don't understand what that means yet. I need to.
So it means
doesn't
in
immediately
terms of,
click in my head.
so the number of GPUs in a data center and the power it consumes,
All right,
it's 98% less.
that's big.
That is big.
Help me understand what prevents the fact that it's open source, the US competitors from just vacuuming up those techniques and applying it to what they do immediately.
They certainly can, but that's the nature of commoditization. You're driving the whole market down in the process.
I can't imagine that there are people downloading that even as we speak to do just that.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
I just opened an architecture firm with it. Don't tell anybody.
Too late.
I think
the goal of open,
go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I was just gonna say the some of these examples of how open source has really driven prices down isn't the main goal. You know, it really is. I mean, driving price down is nice, but taking advantage of new technology is really what's happening there, right? So, so the driving the price down is not the only goal of open source. Driving technology forward faster to have the impact on things like what David is describing is really the goal. It's like solving the problems of labor shortage or optimizing for operational budgets rather than just energy budgets. So moving technology forward faster to be able to solve problems. Sure, it's really nice to see the price be coming down, but that's not the only goal. In fact, it's probably not the primary goal. But it is interesting when these kind of sort of developments, have this disruptive impact.
I wanted to key off of David's point and what Rick just mentioned as well, which is, fundamentally, it's applications that drive value to technology. And we had this conversation on Wednesday that, really everybody takes for granted the energy value propositions that we provide as an industry, some of the regulatory oversight, the other things that collecting, monitoring data, controlling buildings can provide, comfort. But the operative problem of today is manpower, right? We have largely retiring out manpower and workforces. And that's actually a really broad problem that we can provide lots of different axes to solutions of. And to me, that's the next frontier, that the kind of technology that we're talking about here, Rick's promoting, that I think we can really do a lot with manpower and putting a virtual mechanical engineer in the basement of every building to make it operate better.
Give him a corner office on the 4th floor, probably a better idea.
Me?
No, instead of putting him in the basement, why do we always have to put people in the basement?
Because that's our industry, Rick.
Oh, that's right.
How do you know who to sell when you go to a place? You look for where the smokestack is, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So the other thing about this cheese platter is it obviously speaks to an ecosystem of cheese makers and cheese consumers, presumably. And much of the stuff that we've been talking about, the C4SB, is all about building an ecosystem. So what would be our prognosis of creating a good enough ecosystem that can actually make a difference, given this sort of sea change that we're seeing happening?
Well, historically, if you look at what we've got accomplished, we have open protocols so we can share data. We now have fairly open metadata standards, so that's taken us a lot closer. We have, through C4SB and through connection profiles, we have this concept where we can take and share small bits of relevant data rather than huge data sets to applications that need them to facilitate that app store kind of flavor. But there is something that's still largely missing in the controls industry, which is standard configuration tools for systems, right? So if you really want to look at where the proprietary lock-in still resides in systems, and I'm not saying that some proprietary natures, it's not always a bad thing. People need the ability to make money. But right now we have made very little progress on tools. And the standardization of those tools will really help open things up.
What kind of tools are you referring to?
If you just looked at programming languages for control systems, for instance, it's a completely proprietary item, manufacturer to manufacturer. In industrial controls, that problem has been solved by standard IEC programming languages, which are used. There's no reason that those standardization or techniques couldn't be employed here. Or maybe control systems should just be programmed in Python or some open public language that's available. But that's just an example, Anto. Other things would be just the setup tools for control systems. It's all still proprietary.
Yeah, sequence of operations, are all the same, but the way you actually program them is you have to own the programming tool. You have to be licensed and trained and certified and pay for that certification. Now, rumor is that there's a second tier manufacturer that just is announcing the ability to do the programming using Python or Node-RED, steps in the right direction rather than the proprietary programming tools. I think that's clearly one of the things that's on our scope roadmap of what we want to try and convene with C4SB, because there's been some efforts around standardization of sequence of operations, and if we can.
Is there not an ASHRAE? Is that not guideline 36? Is that what?
Yes, it is, and so there's a lot of standards work that's been done. I'd also like to point out that Teletrol was selling control systems that could be programmed in the C programming language, 27 years ago or whatever, 30. So it's not necessarily a new concept, but maybe it's a concept whose time has come.
And so guideline 36 is mostly on VAV systems, but expanding it to be all, and expanding to sequence of operations for all mechanical systems is, it's just not it. The block programming is different from one manufacturer to the next, to the next, to the next. And you have to license and own the software for creating those workstations and then sending the code to the controllers. And that just that proprietary part is obviously going to crack at some point. And like I said, there's rumor of one of the second tier vendors that has done that. And I think all the big vendors know that, and maybe we shouldn't be pre-announcing this, but that's obviously one of the focus of working groups of what we want to try and encourage, through open source, is that the sequence of what needs to be done with the equipment isn't a secret. It's just the tool used to program and to send that instructions to the controllers. That's proprietary.
Correct. So assuming the tools get developed over the coming period, year or two or whatever it is, according to you, Jim, we've sort of dealt with all of the barriers.
I wouldn't say all of them, but I think that's we've made a lot of progress on other barriers over the past 30 or 40 years. But the ones I mentioned are ones that I still see. I think the biggest barrier that we have still, and I'll get on my regular soapbox, is procurement, and the way systems are sold in the construction and build process. Completely ludicrous and needs a reboot. But beyond that, from a technical standpoint, we've made a lot of progress. There's a little more space to go.
Yeah, it wouldn't be Monday Live without Jim mentioning procurement. So
Right.
Thank you. So Steve, do you buy that Jim's sort of assessment of where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, completely. Yeah, I think from the acquisition standpoint, that's been the bugaboo forever. And as we've talked about a fair amount this month, both on Mondays and Wednesdays, is what do we need to do to affect that? How do we reach the C-suite and to the decision makers to get them to start to genuinely alter their behavior? And if it were obvious, I'm assuming we would have fixed it by now. And clearly that's not the case. So it's a discussion I think we should all, particularly, when we're all together at the Smarter Summit, I think it's a worthwhile time to bring that up as well. Might be a good discussion point if we're looking for additional content while we're presenting to bring it up, because I would love to get people starting to help us figure out what to do.
Ken, you came back. I don't know whether you heard much of that.
Yeah, I switched over to my cell phone. The power company had a scheduled shutdown at 1:30, and they thought they would be early, so they came at 12:30. And the good news is they changed the transformer in the time that I disappeared and reappeared. So at least they're on the ball from a speed point of view, but it was supposed to be 1:30 and they somehow converted that to 12:30.
So the summary of what we've been talking about is Jim and others have sort of reflected on that we are definitely at the time of change. Everybody agrees that. There's a lot of technology, there's a lot of the demand, the shape of the demand, and the AI and everything else is all driving the movement forward. And there seems to be will in the industry as well. The two things I think Jim and Steve both sort of said is still needs to be done. One is quite a number of tools needs to be developed, which is fine. Open source is all about tools in many ways. And then the bugaboo of procurement process. So that's kind of where we are. Everybody agree with that summary?
Yep.
I think that if we have an agreement that that's what's going to happen, the question is what is going to affect the business of the industry? And I think that, getting back to the theme of cheese moving, the thing that I'm most interested in is what happens to the channels. We know that the large companies have been fighting the high cost structures of their company-owned distribution channels and are beginning to take those apart and move to independence. The independents, meanwhile, many of them have been rolled up by conglomerates or local roll-ups into much larger companies. So often with a regional geographic footprint, but a fairly large footprint. For instance, the entire Southwest or Southeast, Pacific Northwest, take your pick. But you have these dominant forces. And the question I have is fundamentally the owners. How are the owners going to view and take advantage or change their behavior in light of these technologies that are coming out? So Rick has told us repeatedly that owners are demanding this technology. That's a wonderful thing. But, in markets that I deal with, like cybersecurity, owners are not offering price signals at this point. In other words, they're not willing to pay for anything. They're demanding to have full cybersecurity along with the bidding of their product, and they expect that security to last for 30 or 40 years. And for those of us in the industry, we have to tell them, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. So I don't get it, but I'd love to hear what you all think in terms of how is the channel going to adapt, and how is the owner going to respond to these changes?
One thought on your channel comment, something that I've been dealing with ever since starting Ingenuity almost, and that is the concepts of proprietary and protectionism that exist in our market. It's not just proprietary technology, hardware and software. It's proprietary licensing models, proprietary territories, all of these things that sort of lead to these locked in situation. And I've been saying for years, I was at least 15 years or so, and yet to be determined, for that matter, of when that was all going to change. But I do agree that it seems to be changing in terms of, the structures breaking down, but I still see a lot of territorial protectionism going on in our industry, in our traditional industry. Interestingly, I was on a call in my little subset of that in the QSR market today, and learned that a very long-standing territorial barrier between some of the vendors has been taken down, and the market is kind of opening up to best performance, right? Who can provide the greatest value, not necessarily the lowest price, but the greatest value. And even with that, the guy I was talking to is one of the vendors in this situation, said that after this has been going on for a while, I didn't know, this is more than a year, they'll go into a territory only to find out that their the potential prospects, customers in that territory, still don't know that the cheese has moved, that the world is different. And they're like, I didn't even know you could operate in our territory. Why are you even here talking to us? And I think there's, a lot of that educational piece of it that's going to have to go hand in hand with all this. And this is not going to be an overnight process. This is going to take time.
I think that, speaking to this from an asset manager real estate investment perspective, there's a huge disconnect between the people who look at the spreadsheets and use Argus and Yardi and rent rolls to determine whether or not they invest or sell a property, the topics we're talking about don't even get on their radar. And that, to me, is something I've been on these calls for a long time, talking about. We need the value story that is attractive to the investors. And then Rick is always right to point out that there are institutional universities and organizations that hold huge portfolios that we should be focusing our efforts on now, because they have the immediate need and they get it. And I agree with Rick, but I also know that this is a huge blind spot of opportunity for real estate investors. And there's a massive opportunity there for whomever wakes up, and instead of trying to fight the disclosure requirements for the EPA and local law 97 and the state of California and the SEC, embrace it, get ahead of it, and outperform the market, and see how your assets accrue value faster and you have better tenants. I think there's absolutely a play for this thinking, but I think the real estate investment community has yet to see the value of it in the United States. In Canada, I see it starting to happen, and in Europe, absolutely it's happening.
Apparently, the invisible hand that Adam Smith talks about just needs to wake up and slap the US across the face or something.
Well, what it's going to be is somebody who does it, who outperforms all the competition.
Yeah.
There you go. That'll do it. So Roger asked a really good question on chat. What would be on the top of your wish list for the big guys to do or stop doing to accelerate these efforts?
Don't change a thing. Just stay right there. Everything's fine.
Not a bad comment.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm not sure we have time on this call, but maybe we'll pick that up as a, what do we want collectively to see change in Orlando when we get there. So that'll be
that would be a great discussion, actually.
Yeah, let's do that
And
next
it's
week.
not just one thing, it's a collection of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Rick, did you have something else you want to chime in before we wrap this?
Just going to say at least one of them is going to.
Yes.
Yes. Going to what? Well, we don't know for sure, but one of them, at least one of them is going to. One of the bigs.
If one changes, they'll all change. That'd
Funny
be
how
my
that
call.
works.
I mean, that's what, it was like the BACnet war in the old days. It, as soon as somebody caved, then everybody, within a year, everybody else was over supporting BACnet.
So, Steve, you want 30 seconds to just wrap up what we've talked about here? Sorry, I'm picking on you.
Anto, I want to toss it back to you. I think that's only right.
Okay, well, I think we've sort of painted the picture of what this cheese platter, what's on it. And it's almost like the issue is that who's making the platter is as much of an issue of what's on the platter. And I think what we're doing with C4SB and what we're doing launching the sort of the Linux movement in Orlando is really that plate. And we have the bits. We have the pieces of cheese and other things that's necessary to make it a delicious dish. So that's my wrap up. So with that, let's wrap the call. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a great week, and we'll have another show next week before AHR since we're in February. And yeah, bring the wine and go go with the cheese. Good point. Good point.
But
All right.
thank you.
Bye, guys.
But guys.
See you all. Bye.
Bye.